Hej och välkomna till det här webbinariet som arrangeras av IMS, som är Institutet för studier av mångreligiositet och sekularitet. And this seminar will be held in English. And the theme of today's seminar is witchcraft and trafficking. And we have 3 speakers, and then there will be a small discussion. We will be going on for 1 hour. And if you who are attending the seminar have questions, you're most welcome to write this question in the Q&A function, which you can find at the lower bar of your Zoom window. And there you can write questions, and we will put these questions to the speakers. The speakers of today's seminar are Per Englund, who's a Swedish police officer who for decades has worked with trafficking-related crime in Stockholm. We have Ana Dols Garcia, who holds a PhD from the University of Extremadura in Spain, and her thesis focuses on witchcraft-related practices in criminal law. And we also have Ann Kubai, who is an associate professor in the study of religions at Södertörn University and an expert in religion, gender, and conflict in Africa and Europe. And without further ado, we will move on to the first presenter, who will be Per. And I give the word to you now. You can present your experience on this theme for 10 to 15 minutes before we move on. So please, Per, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Per Englund. I work at the police at the Department of National Operations in combating THP. I began that in 2004 at the local level in Stockholm City. And then I moved on in 2008 to the national level, the Bureau of National Investigations. I'm responsible on national level to combat THP. My first case about Nigerian THP was in 2009. In that case, we had 2 victims of trafficking. Both was recruited when they were 16 years of age. And it was quite hard for us to reach out to them because of the promise they had done with the shrine and the shaman, a juju promise, a juju oath. And in that sense, we tried much to break this oath. We have tried to the Swedish Nigerian priests to break that oath, but it seems like we need to get some help in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we have the NAPTIP, who is responsible for combating THP in Nigeria. They has helped us and our colleagues in Europe to break this type of oath, because they goes to the shrine and convince the priest to revoke this oath. When it comes to the victims, many of them are quite strong believers. We have not that type of case in Sweden, but in Belgium, they had a case where a victim began to talk. After a while, she became nervous and worried, and unfortunately now is hospitalized due to mental problems because she talked to the police. When we reach out to victims, the first we do is asked about the religion. We always get the answer, I'm Christian, I believe in Jesus, and I pray every morning. When we asked about this juju, they nearly always say that they don't believe. But when we are questioning them or interviewing them about the case, we see that they are very reluctant to talk about their madam and what happened to them. And that's because this juju. The juju or voodoo is when they take the oath, they don't take the oath to be a prostitute. They take the oath to pay back some money, about between $30,000 and $80,000 or euro. That's the oath that they take, is to pay that sum of money back to the madam because she's bringing them to Europe. And this is problematic for us, this juju oath, as I said before. So we have within something that's called Impact, European Multidisciplinary Platform Against Criminal Threats. There is a group called ETUTU. It's 15 EU countries who is talking together about their cases and also inviting foreign police officers. And in this case, we have invited several times officers from Nigeria, from the NAPTIP. And they are explaining for us how to get to the victim, how to tell the victim that they could help her to revoke this oath. In 2018, the King of Benin City has announced in March 2018, has announced that he revokes all oaths taken by victims of trafficking. He also announced that every priest that takes such an oath of a victim of trafficking will also be yes, sometimes a word is hard to find, but he cast an oath of them to them that will bring them disaster. So this was a very big announcement from Oba II, the King of Benin City. And NAPTIP was very pleased about that he announced this oath breaking for the victims of trafficking. What we have seen now is that they are moving outside Edo states to other priests outside and take the oath there, because the king has only power over the Benin City and some bits of Edo states. So I'm pleased to get some questions. We had only one case with trafficking in Nigeria, but I have a lot of information from Europe about it.
Thank you, Per. I think we will do like this. We'll take all the three presentations. So everyone who has questions concerning the specific Swedish situation and the police work in this, please write your questions in the Q&A function, and we will come back to it after all the three presentations. So thank you, Per. And now we move on to Kubai, and I'm so happy to see your face on the screen. We had we had something of a technological panic situation before, and we had to start without you. Wow, well, I'm very happy. I was so happy to see your screen come up there on the top bar. So, in the study of religions at Södertörn University, and who has studied these matters. Please welcome. You're muted now, so you have to unmute. The lower left side of the Zoom window, there's an icon of a microphone.
Yes, I'm trying to share the screen so that I can go over my PowerPoint presentation, but I don't seem to be getting it shown. Anyway, if I can't share it, then I will. Yeah, I'm trying to share it. Actually.
If you start the PowerPoint and then you press share screen, which is an icon at the lower bar.
Okay, I go to the PowerPoint first, and then yes, there, and then I go to the share screen. I get out of this and go to share screen, and can you see it now?
Yes, yes.
Yes. According to what David you had asked, I would like to give a broad background to this. And the reason for giving a broad background is because there hasn't been a sufficient research on this topic, and people really don't quite understand very much about it. And I have spent a lot of time since 2000 and I started the first project in 2012 with funding from Broads of Manhattan, and that is when I discovered out of the 87 women that I had interviewed, 63 had been trafficked. That's how this whole project started. And most of the women were really scared to talk about this kind of thing because nobody wants to accept that they are a prostitute or that they have been trafficked, because most of them do not even understand the meaning of trafficking. They just say that they went to business people to help them. And trafficking is a language that we ourselves are using because they say they come to Europe to get work. And here in Sweden, I've interviewed quite a number of women, 23 actually. Most of them had been trafficked, some willingly, others unwillingly. But I would like to say something about African worldviews, because also people need to know what that means, why we have people trafficked for sex, and why the oaths are very, very strong, and they cannot just be ignored when somebody has taken an oath. And also we have heard that, although I joined late, that the Oba made this declaration. Why his declaration is actually limited only to this particular jurisdiction. And also there can be a lot of questions about that and how effective that can be. And that's why you see they are going to different places, because there is a whole issue with these oaths. Anyway, from African traditional worldviews related to witchcraft, I can just point out a few things that might be known, but they are important. There is already a connection between the material and the spiritual worlds. This is very, very important from African worldviews. Secondly, the worldviews of different African communities converge on the idea that there are spiritual reasons for ordinary everyday occurrences. All these are, this is the background to everything that I'm going to say. And also that sacred and secular realities were in the African traditional setup and are still today inseparably connected. And in the African thought systems, there is a common practice that attributes misfortune to supernatural powers. And also, through commoditization of time and labor with new work patterns, we find that the missionaries and the colonialists severely disrupted the family traditional structure, and these had repercussions. And so to deal with this emerging disorder or order at that time, there was competition for power. That's why we have people like the Obas here still powerful. And because of this disorder or new order and the competition for power and resources, if you like, there was need to fortify and protect. There was already a huge threat. That was a common threat that people needed to be protected from. And therefore, that's why these practices that are now being called witchcraft or voodoo in the European media became very important, because they also underwent a dynamic change to be able to address new threats. So what I'm trying to say from the beginning is these practices of witchcraft and voodoo have been going through a change. They have always adjusted to the prevailing changes. I mean, that came to the society. So quickly then, what is witchcraft? It is difficult to define witchcraft and the witches, of course, not the 19th century, 15th century English witches that we know about in popular culture. Witchcraft is generally defined as ability of a person or a group to cause harm to others using supernatural powers. And that is why this whole thing is located within African traditional religions and African traditional religious beliefs and practices. And I'm saying this with an emphasis, not only because this is the study we're doing, but because this is the reality. In Africa, people rely on beliefs and practices, which are often classified as witchcraft, to protect individuals and families, as well as, mark this, cause affliction to those who threaten harmony. And that is why they can be used for the good and for the bad. And as you can check in the Encyclopedia Britannica, it is defined as, juju is defined as an object deliberately infused with magical power, the magical power itself, or the belief systems of juju. So juju practices are widespread in the continent, especially Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana, and all those places. But the ideas are common elsewhere. They may not use the same parlance, the same language of juju, but the ideas are common everywhere. So what I'm going to say is that the underlying belief when juju items are placed together is that spiritual assimilation and diffusion occurs, resulting in energy and agency. And that is where it now matters when it comes to the use for trafficking and prostitution, because then this agency and energy come together upon the person who has been sworn an oath. And of course, the oaths, as I'm going to show, are very, very serious affairs. So in many contexts, then, there's a thin line between ideas of evil spirits, magic, sorcery, spell casting, curses, witches, or witchcraft. But there is a limited understanding about this. So how do they work, these practices, in these different cultures? From different perspectives on witchcraft, we have seen that there has been this kind of evolution. So these elements, these practices these concepts, these beliefs are used for different functions. Especially now with technology, technology has given them a boost. The juju priests and other priests and religious leaders and practitioners who are involved, for example, in trafficking, they are able to control the women who are already in Europe through the use of the telephone messages. And these messages are used to buttress the oaths which have already been sworn. And this gives then the oaths a transnational character. So what I'm trying to suggest is our research has shown that they have also assumed a transnational character. They are not only limited to the space and place in Africa where they were sworn. We have seen cases here in Europe and even in Sweden where people have had the oaths that they took back home being renewed right here where we are. So that means also they are used across social classes. It's not only the poor people who believe in oaths or who take oaths. Now, what are the rituals themselves and the oaths? The main characteristic of the rituals and the oaths is that they are binding. And the consequences of breaking oaths are dire. And this is important for the agencies in Sweden, for example, that service providing agencies, the police task forces, and other people who are involved in the prevention of trafficking and prostitution to understand that the consequences of breaking an oath are dire. In the traditional setup, somebody could be ostracized, and also breaking the oath can result in death. Oaths are extremely feared. Therefore, traffickers have found the usefulness in them for the purpose of recruiting and trafficking women. I would differ if I had a chance to explain very well why the oaths are not just for paying the money. The oaths are just very important for recruitment and also for bondage and for keeping someone in the job. And for many other reasons, because they bind the person with the community, they bind the person with the others in the trafficking ring and all that. Also, we know the same used for the good, for healing, for rainmaking, for protecting communities, but most rituals, and this is important to note, have got the most important ingredient, which is blood, both animal and human. And for those who believe in this, the blood is a very important element, and it makes it it gives it the utmost seriousness and of course efficacy. So the main purpose is to ensure compliance to social norms in normal cases. And in the case of trafficking, it is to ensure compliance. It's not only for specific things. It's to ensure compliance for the entire process so that somebody has no chance to report to the police without expecting consequences, or to give up, or to run away, or to disobey, for example. So oath taking generally also in normal circumstances is taken as a deterrent to commission of crimes or omission in observing social norms, and it is used to identify and punish the wrongdoers. And I'm saying all these things because those who have been put through the oaths and they stick with the oaths is because there is a punishment that is inevitable should they break the oath. So I don't want to spend time talking about human trafficking. You know the numbers, you know the statistics, but I should only mention that globally 71% of enslaved people are women and girls, while boys are only 29% in comparison to 71%. And I should also mention that for trafficking, 150 billion a year for traffickers, and of that 99 billion which come from commercial sex exploitation. Anyway, so if I may say something about our project. It's a pioneer project.
And so I think you need to wrap up.
Okay. All right, let me see the most important thing I want to say. The most important thing I want to say then is that we have found out with our research that there is an unholy alliance, what I have called an unholy alliance. This is when religion or if you like witchcraft or voodoo comes into an alliance with the liberal doctrine so that the old practices are taken on to support trafficking for commercial reasons. So we are looking at old practices such as the Vidomorgan, where children are taken to families to live there more or less in bondage, and the practice of trokosi, which is widespread in West Africa. But I would like to tell you, trokosi is the slaves for the gods. And this is where virgin cows are taken to the shrines, and they live in the shrines for a long time. I don't have time to explain that, but we are also trying to see what is the connection with that, because these are sex slaves for the priests and of course for the gods. But there's also something else that we have found out, which is that in Islam, you know that you allowed 4 wives, but then there is this practice of the 5th wife, which is Wahaya, and this is found mainly in Niger, where we are also doing research. And so the 5th wife becomes, is usually a 9-year or 14-year girl who serves as a slave to both the wives and all the male heads of the households. And this is quite prevalent, and we're trying to see whether the Trokosi, slaves of the gods, the Vidomorgan children, and the Wahaya women, or whether all these now, because they are already in a very vulnerable situation, whether they are also likely to be trafficked. Simply, we're trying to see what is the connection, because the hypothesis is that there is a connection. And now we're investigating this because it's a matter of traditional practices, religious practices, which can pave way for human trafficking. And finally, I would like to say that to remind you about voodoo and prostitution in Sweden, the first case was found in 2010 in Gothenburg. I think you all know about it. And there have been many others after that which have not hit the news, the headlines. But simply, we have used different methods, and one of the methods to actually be with the priests in those shrines and see what happens. And also, this study has been special in that we have followed the women from Africa, or we are following them right from Africa, some from those shrines up to Europe, and then we have been in the streets where they go and they work, and we have talked to both the women, the priests, the customers, and their families, who have in some cases sold them deliberately so that they can be sending money from home, and that is also part of the contract that is sealed through these rituals. So I can't say all that I wanted to say then, because I don't have much time, but maybe during the questions, I can get a chance to explain more.
Thank you very much, Anne, for this very rich presentation. And I'm sure there are hundreds of questions into this horrifying and fascinating field. And this seminar serves as very brief introduction to a phenomenon that obviously needs to be elucidated by much research and work. And we will move on now to the third speaker, who is Ana Dolz Garcia from the University of Extremadura in Spain. Please, Ana.
Hi, everybody. Let me put the... Can you see it now? Cannot see you. Okay, can you see the screen?
No, we cannot see the screen. So you need to press share screen. So now it works. If you can make it into this, yeah, perfect.
Thank you. So the worst businesses in the world. That's what our prosecutor told me when doing research about how these issues of juju and trafficking are dealing injustice. So I did my research, my PhD on witchcraft-related practices that have happened, like especially in Spain, but also like in different countries around Europe, like focusing on different areas, including like witchcraft allegations against children that are happening in Europe, but with a main focus on all these practices of ritual oaths, juju, and sex trafficking. So while doing the research, that was mostly based on analyzing different judicial sentences, but also like talking to different prosecutors, police officers, and NGO workers. These are like some of the issues that come out. And also, like first, just to frame everything, I want to focus only on the specifically challenge related with these ritual oaths and juju, while we all know that all the challenges related in a broader term with all related with this like trafficking and prostitution. So the worst businesses in the world. Why? They refer that, I mean, like sometimes like victims, they have like a lot of gaps, they have like an inconsistent narrative, that they may change even the narrative of that they have, which makes it very difficult, like in a judicial court to proceed a case. In some cases, people think that it's related because of the ritual oath that they take, as it was pointed out by Anne before, because of the fear that they have. And in some cases, even when victims start talking about that in court, they start like blocking themselves or having like, you know, like a physical reaction when they start talking about these issues related with juju and ritual oaths. Something is very important is like to have like police units, attorney or public prosecutors that know about the case. Like Per was also mentioning about YouTube projects or different ways of enhancing knowledge about these issues. It's important also that when doing research that everything, I mean, when taking the comments of the victims, like to take it like in a proper way to avoid that it's like everything that is repetitive, everything that is oversimplified, just like saying like, well, the victim went through a juju ritual, then in court it will have like it may have like less value. Something that we're mentioning like general things like protection, covering basic needs, but there has been cases, I recall it was like in Italy, where there was just like one of the traffickers inside the court, also just like following the court. No? So in these cases of circumstances, it's clear that the victim won't feel like in a proper setting to disclose information and to collaborate with authorities. Something that is being used in different settings is like the collaborating with cultural mediator or specialized NGOs in trafficking. In many times, like there are also like former victims who collaborate, so trying to give like some confidence, some tools to the victims for them to speak up. Also, and that was mentioned before, collaborating with the spiritual leaders. There has been like different experience. There was like a famous case like in the Netherlands, the Colby's case, in which like victims spoke also with a pastor before going to court. And one of the things, for example, that in court, then the lawyers for the part start saying like, well, but that is because the pastor put words in the victim, so they try also like to have to minimize like the testimony of the victims. And something that is also important is the use of language. It has been clear sometimes, like in court or in some sentences, when they try to assimilate like European concepts with concepts from Africa, from the region where the victims come, and that doesn't match many times. So that leads at the end like to wrong conclusions. Also many times, and I was also mentioning before, when you talk to victims and ask them like, what do you believe in juju? Maybe they say like, no, but it doesn't mean that they are not moved by the impact of these rituals. So also like how to ask questions in court will facilitate or a better testimony. In any case, which is important also when talking about the testimony of victims, is that everything should be put in place so that the testimony of the victim, to use everything as possible, so not to put the pressure on the testimony of the victim. Another issue is like the medical forensic exams we see here that come from the UK, like different signs that are done during the rituals. In this case, for these kind of situations, we had to be careful also that are not misleading and they get confused with other kind of rituals or just like traditional medicine or traditional drugs or other traditional rituals that may forfeit. Also, as some experts mentioned, we have to be careful also not to make the person just like have a human manifestation of juju, and really examining everything around the person. Also, to be careful not to mix that with other like traditional signs that many others may have also. Something that has been found sometimes during, Per may know more about it, during making like research in places where victims are, it does physical evidence of different ritual oaths that come from the Spanish police that was found when doing a research in the place of victims. So for sure, like having this kind of items like will support also like the prosecution in a court, but it's not always the case when you find this kind of items. Yeah, so like in many cases, as we mentioned, like rituals are done like in Nigeria or in other areas, so it's not so easy to find this kind of items. In some cases, like victims have requested to whether to take or to destroy this kind of items, or till these were not like put outside the hands of the traffickers, they didn't feel a little bit more or less into talking and collaborating with authorities. And also, like, I mean, we were talking before, like other kind of evidence, like registration of different calls, when according also like to different police, is like very frequent also that they speak about juju related issues, or that comes into the discussion. One of the issues, and I didn't mention before, sorry, relating also with the testimony of the victim, but also with the registration of calls, is the issue of the translation, which is always, or in many cases, like an issue to find also like translators that are familiar with the vocabulary, that is familiar with the context, or that they are not afraid even like of the effect of the juju. Another situation has been the use of expert testimony. For example, in UK, in at least 2 cases, there has been like an expert for like in African studies who has like explained to the court what are all these rituals, where do they come from, so that they could frame everything in a specific context. So then for the tribunal to take the best decision in the moment. That in some cases I have heard that, well, the problem is that in these cases, like the other part may bring another expert, and at the end it's like a discussion between 2 experts, so that will somehow like limit the effect of that. What are like the criminal defense strategies related with that we have seen that is the case, like at least in Spanish tribunals. Well, sometimes they say like it's a violation of the freedom of religion, saying that like juju rituals may lead to somehow like trafficking, or to impact like the situation of the victim. Sometimes they claim that, well, like how it can happen that if the victim has really gone through the juju ritual, that they still have some kind of freedom of movement. Sometimes they are like, well, it's to kind of believe that that really happened, that really worked, and that sometimes victims can't really like believe that so much, so that's affect their decisions. And something that has been also alleged, and especially with these kind of items have not been found, the items that we saw before, is like, well, there is no evidence that there has been gone through the ritual oaths, or there is no like proof that they have gone through these ritual oaths. In sentencing, something that it was quite shocking with analyzing, it's just like, when talking with NGOs, when talking with police, they say like, well, juju ritual oaths is something that come out a lot, that is not come out, but you see that it's had like a huge impact in the life of the victims and how they react and the decisions they take. But on the contrary, when we see like the judicial outcomes, there is usually not a lot of reference to this situation. And sometimes when it does, it's quite like in automatic way. Sometimes it's just like as a fact that, well, the victim went through a ritual, but without really going into a more detailed like analysis of how can that impact the victim. In the case when there has been like a little bit more reference, in some cases, some of the misleading information we can say that we have found is that they underestimate African traditional beliefs, saying like, well, this oath is just like irrational, or it's just like for people that live like in undeveloped countries. So not treating that in a, or treating it in a quite discrimination way. Another is the lack of knowledge of religious syncreties. Like as Per was mentioning before, many victims say like, well, I'm Christian. And then in this case, they say like, well, the victim said that he's Christian, so we cannot believe that he also believes in ritual oaths, but we all know that it's not incompatible. Also regarding to the profile of the victims, for example, I remember one case that it was like, well, the victim has quite like a knowledge, they went to the school, have like a good knowledge, so we cannot believe that she believes also like in this kind of ritual oaths. And more of the mistakes are also like related to what is the role of ritual oaths and juju in sex trafficking. So maybe they can, sometimes they say like, well, if the victim is so scared for the ritual oaths, how it can happen that she's collaborating with the police. Well, the fact that you overcome a fear, it doesn't mean that you are not afraid of that, for example. So I think that that's all. I think that all that request us is like to think out of the box, to get information, to put everything into a frame, and at the same time, like finding a balance between getting information and getting this in a context, and at the same time, not putting a lot of emphasis in that at the end that led us also to misleading decisions and responses. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anna. So now we have another 15 minutes for discussion between the three panelists and ourselves. And all the listeners are welcome to write their questions in the Q&A function at the lower bar of the Zoom window. Can I just begin by asking one question? So Per, you mentioned that one of the victims that you had come across was now hospitalized, who had dared to move away from this oath, and now she was hospitalized. And Anna, you were also both sort of touching upon how it actually works, this type of magical spell binding that we're talking about here. Could you unpack that a little bit? So how can someone be hospitalized for breaking an oath? How does that work? How can we, from a sort of secular perspective, understand that dynamics? Per, do you want to say something?
I think the belief in this tradition is so high at that victim that she couldn't cope to break the oath, because she talked to the police about her madam. She gave a statement against the madam. And in Belgium, you're not obliged to bring the victim to the court. You only need the statement from the victim. Yeah. So in this case, the madam was sentenced because of her statement. And that was her breaking of the oath.
Anna, so you're nodding. Is this your view of it as well? You're muted. Please unmute your mic.
Yes, if I may add to what Per is saying from my practical experience, and remember I was raised in societies that practice these things. So for me also, I have heuristic knowledge, because I grew up with all this stuff. Of course, we are Methodists. My family didn't do it, but I saw it all. The point is that when this particular woman was courageous enough, I haven't seen her, but from the circumstances that I know, it is very traumatic. And as Anna was showing us those marks, and they take the blood, which I mentioned before. So the oath is very strong. It's very traumatic to go through it, and therefore it's unthinkable to break it. It is unthinkable. So the fact that she broke the oath, this became extremely, as I have seen with many others here, became extremely psychological. And so she was actually very traumatized and psychologically unwell. And sometimes, I'm not a medical doctor, but I have seen that when you are psychologically unwell, it also becomes physical. Some people are unable to speak, or they have pain and they become even numb or dumb or whatever. So the psychological thing becomes physical. And when both are embedded in the psyche, especially because of the fear of the oath, the person can even become paralyzed. As I have seen in a case right from UK to Sweden. So I think that is why the woman was hospitalized, because it had become already physical, this psychological trauma. But what I know is that it's very difficult for the doctors to deal with this trauma unless they understand the things that I told you before, because I've seen a case already here in the hospital, but the doctors were not helping. And that's why the people believe that the medical doctors don't help. And if I have one more second to explain, the only study done a long time ago by Van Dijk said that the Dutch police formed a Dutch police force to go and get the women, take them to psychologists, and also paid juju priests to undo the harm that had been done. My reaction to that was very quickly to say, no, the priests were not actually undoing the harm done when the girls took the oath. They were re-traumatizing them, because they were also putting them again through other rituals. And that was my quick reaction. I also found out quite some time back that the Norwegian team went to Denmark, to Holland, to the Netherlands, to try and see if they can learn something from that particular encounter. I didn't talk to them later on to see if they are able to implement something from what they learned, if at all they learned something. So what I'm trying to say by citing these cases is to show you that it has been very difficult for the agencies and the NGOs and service providing agencies also, or service providing agencies, to address this psychological trauma, which becomes physical because of all this experience that somebody has gone through.
Yeah. So Anna Dolz-Garcia, you were encouraging us to think outside of the box, or people working with this type of problem. What does that mean? How should then a public official from the police or from the juridical instance, or some teachers or social service people, how can society think out of the box to help these women and some men who are suffering from this type of oppression? How can they deal with this without, what can you say to the people working with this type of cases? I mean, we have the advice to get more knowledge, but should they accept, like this Dutch, in this Dutch case, accept the logic, the cultural logic of this magic, or how should they do? What's your advice?
Well, it's a tricky question, and I think there is also not like an only answer. I think as you were mentioning, and we mentioned before, like I think like getting information and understanding what is like the framework in everything works, I think that's key. And also collaboration. I think like collaboration from different stakeholders. We are seeing like police, but people that work also like in social science, like African anthropology, like people who work like in NGOs that are close to victims, that have this experience of accompanying them. I think like all this like working together and putting the hands, I mean like the heads together into coming with different ideas and ways to accompany victims in the best way possible. I think that's the solution. And we have seen already like some kind of like different approaches, like bringing like different experts to court, or like this collaboration with spiritual leaders that, well, are given like different outcomes. But I think like exploring always like keeping the victims at the center and keeping like the respect and the protection of the victim at the center. I think that's what is key also.
So how about talking about other spiritualists? Anna, please. Unmute, please.
Yes, I just want to add something to what Anna said. Using the case of Gothenburg, which I can remind you was dropped because the girls were too scared to testify. The police could see evidence that the woman had sold them first from Gothenburg and then to Malmö and back. And therefore the girls were too scared to testify. The police dropped the case because the requirement was that they testify. Okay, in the Belgian case, they were not supposed to appear and testify, but when they gave the testimony, the woman was, if I understood correctly, was of course imprisoned. So why I'm comparing these two cases is that in Denmark, we also had a different situation. So because the countries have different judicial processes and laws and the application of these laws, we find that there is no common way of addressing this problem. That's what I'm trying to say. Denmark did a different thing, Netherlands did a different thing, Sweden did a different thing, and the women suffered. And now the woman also in Belgium suffered, but at least the madam was, some justice was done, the madam was arrested and imprisoned. So because of that diversity of addressing the issues, that presents a very difficult challenge because of one thing. The women that I know here in Uppsala, they fly to London, or they take a train to Norway or to Denmark on Friday, and they are back here. And because of that movement, the ease of movement, they work in different legal jurisdictions, let me use that word, and therefore they are able to work in different situations because of this. So it's something to consider also when we're trying to think of solutions.
If you ask them themselves how they would, what type of help they would need, what would they say?
I give two answers. First answer, I remember being asked by the task force. We discussed with the Swedish National Task Force that there is need for lectures to explain so that at least the officers who are working with these issues and other agencies know the background that I've been trying to give. In that way, if there is cultural knowledge and expertise, at least the people will know this is the problem that they are addressing. The police and the rest of them would understand what they are dealing with. And therefore, when they speak to the women and the women see these people understand our problem, maybe that can make it possible for them to collaborate, and then they can get the help that they need to come out of the problem. The second thing is actually when people work with, like now with the OBA made this announcement. But if you ask me about the announcement and whether it would be helpful, I would give a long lecture on that, which I will not do. But when people get the knowledge, they would work with the countries where people are coming from, so that even when they end up in Europe, there is this understanding of the chain itself, because people don't even understand the various stages of this traumatic chain of transport, recruiting and transporting, and people ending up here.
So, we have a question to you on Kubai, which goes like this. You said that those African women do not understand they have been trafficked. What is their understanding of the situation they are in? And how does that understanding affect their experience of their situation?
Okay, the women have asked, there have been different categories. There are some women who said that they needed help to get out of the country. And they needed it, they knew it can be dangerous and difficult, but they knew that it can be done. They needed money, they needed passports, and they needed to speak to business people. The word is business people. At least more than 30 women use that phrase, business people, who can then move you. But I want to remind you that this recruitment starts in West Africa, even with grandmothers, people who are trusted in the village. So the grandmother comes and says to somebody that, oh, I know in Europe your daughter can be employed, because the daughter of that grandmother lives in Italy and she is the contact person through her mother to collect the girls and send the girls to Italy to that woman who then spreads them across Europe. So in that kind of scenario, the women are not considering themselves trafficked. They are considering themselves being helped to go to Europe to find work. They know, actually, many of them know that they may actually work as prostitutes. That they know. But then they have seen those who have worked as prostitutes and they have been able to send money home, or they have even built homes or houses back home, or they have lifted themselves to Europe in a better way, or to live in a better way than they did in their own place. They have at the same time seen others who have suffered misfortune and they returned. And the returnees are not very well received. That's another long story. So okay, that's what I can tell you in short.
So how about the size of this problem? Per, you mentioned quite a low number of people who had been known to the Swedish police. It seemed like Anna's number was larger. Is this are Swedish authorities aware of the size of this problem? How many women are included in these networks, or is this just something that passes unknown to the authorities? What do you say, Per, about
that? According to Europol, 12% of all victims are from Nigeria. It's a huge problem in the southern part of EU. It's a problem in Sweden, but most of them, when we question them, they say they are independent. They work for a madam, but they have paid their debt. So in most cases, it will be procuring, not THP.
Okay.
We have too little evidence of the background. We can't give the prosecutor enough to indict them for trafficking. That's the biggest problem that we have. But we do work with several countries in Europe, and we exchange information about it.
What do you say, Anna Dolz-Garcia, what do you say? Is this, can the juridical system in Europe handle this problem in an accurate way? Is it just the top of the iceberg that gets dealt with by the police?
Well, I think from the very beginning we mentioned, I mean, like the issue of trafficking is such a challenge in terms of crime, in terms of how to deal with that, in terms of how to protect victims, in terms of how to lead the persecution. So like in all kind of trafficking and in all countries in the world, in these cases, like it has like these specific challenges that we can say also like it's related also with some cultural issues, with other issues that can make also like things a little bit more challenging for us. But I think we had to frame it into the general context of all the challenge that like the fight against trafficking involves.
Anna, do you want to give a final word before we close the session?
Yes, I just want to explain perhaps why Per is saying it's very difficult to get the numbers. The thing is, when people come, the word is to come, to travel to Europe, not to be trafficked. Very few will claim that. But majority of the people who have been trafficked you can check the definition of trafficking. It is very, very comprehensive in a sense, not completely, but in a sense. So people come even as visiting. A neighbor of mine brought 8 people, 1 woman, 8. So those people were coming from this and that, route and this and that. And now what has happened, why the police has even a lot of trouble getting people who can claim to be actually trafficked is because for sex purposes, is because sex has gone technological. And that's what I was trying to say at the beginning, that it has given it a boost and it has made it transnational. People they come even as a visitor on that route and they get into trouble, and then what do? They turn to telephone prostitution. Or even if they came directly knowing they were going to do prostitution, now there is what is done on the telephone, and you don't have to go to the streets of Stockholm as I used to go and find them there. Now I don't find them there mainly because they are in other places using the telephone. This is why now it has become also very complicated to tell you how many do it. And when I go to see them in the particular places, of course, so I also have a challenge, because when I'm doing research, I'm not a policewoman. I'm not supposed to be counting and reporting how many I met in a certain place. Sometimes I know when I go to African churches to do my research, sometimes I will see the same people that I saw in another place. I'm not saying, oh, women who go to the church and do that. No, but I'm saying, first of all, the whole project started from that. So the point is, it's very difficult because it's very diffuse, this whole idea of somebody declaring themselves trafficked. And that is why the police have a challenge.
Yes. Okay, that will have to be the closing word. Obviously, we have only scratched on the very top of the surface of a very big and complex discussion. So, but thank you very much, Ann Kubai and Per Englund and Anna Dolz Garcia for joining this seminar, which was hosted by IMS, Institute for the Study of Multireligiosity and Secularity in Stockholm. Thank you very much. And by that, we close the session.